Today's topic is super important, and it's about fitting the bust. Now, there's a large group that is sometimes forgotten, and it's about all of you who have a smaller cup size. Maybe you have an A sewing cup size, a B sewing cup size, and though a lot of patterns might work for you and might have that option, there might be a few that are just made for larger bust cup sizes, and you will have fitting issues there, and it is something that you can fix and get the perfect fit just for you. Stay tuned. Hi sewing friends, my name's Karina and this is Lifting Pins and Needles, a channel all about sewing, limitless sewing. And a couple of months ago I started a series on my channel all about fitting a simple woven top. Your simple woven tee as such that fits well at the shoulders, has a bust start, that has a nice amount of ease at the waist and hips, something really comfortable that you can work on to improve your fit. And there's a lot of episodes already up on the channel. I'll put all the thumbnails here so that you can see, and I'll link the playlist down below. There is a lot already for you to see. And I had been resting, taking a little break from the fitting series because, let's be honest, making each of these videos takes me weeks and weeks and weeks, and the video for today is no exception. Now, the last video I made was about full bust adjustments, and now I'm going over to the other side of what others experience, and that is a small bust adjustment. Now, it is a fitting issue, and I will be mentioning some comparisons between full bust adjustments and small bust adjustments so that you get the picture that although they are on the extremes and very different, it can sort of help you understand what's going on with fitting. Sometimes people that have a larger bust cup size and just go up and sew a pattern, choose a size based on their full bust, they end up with really wide shoulders, neckline that gapes, all of that, and then the bust circumference is correct, but you have gaping in the armholes and the neckline. So when you have a smaller cup size and you're sewing a pattern drafted for a larger cup size than you have sort of a opposite situation going on, because in both scenarios, if you're not doing any of these adjustments, you're choosing a pattern based on your full bust. So you choose your pattern based on your full bust, but you might find that the shoulders are really tight and narrow, the upper back, and it's because this area of the garment is not fitting you correctly for your bust cup size. So it's polar opposites. Either you end up with really wide shoulders if you need a full bust adjustment, or you end up with tight, narrow fitting shoulders if you need a small bust adjustment. So all these bust adjustments in general, the whole aim of them is for you to have a correct fit on the bust and the shoulders. That has to be nice and even. And that's why we do these adjustments. If you are really fortunate to have a sewing B cup size, then I think most patterns will fit you correctly and you will never have to do any adjustments. And I can say honestly, that was my case about until I was maybe 30. I had a sewing B cup size. I didn't even know fitting issues existed. I would just choose a pattern and sew it up and it would be excellent. Over time, as years have gone by, motherhood, weight gain, all sorts, now I have a sewing C cup size, and I do sometimes have some fitting adjustments on the bust. Now, I talk about sewing cup sizes, and I have discussed this previously. It's not the same as your bra cup size. When you look at your bra cup size, the measurements taken there are totally different, and I'll put a little diagram for you to see. For bra making, it's a whole different story because they're actually drafting for the volume that goes underneath your bust, and also based on the circumference below your bust, under the bust, around the top of the rib cage there. It's a really tight fitted measurement there, the under bust, and then the full bust. The difference between that will give you a cup size for your bra. It's totally different to garments because garments aren't cupping anything. They're actually just flowing over the bust from here down. And so a sewing cup size is nothing to do with your bra cup size. So if you know your bra cup size, just forget about it, put it away in your mind, just forget about it and measure yourself. I'll put a diagram here, measure your upper bust, measure your full bust, see what that difference is. And as I mentioned, most patterns draft for a B cup, which is a 2-inch difference or a 5-centimeter difference in metric. Now, what happens if you have just 1-inch difference there from your upper bust and your full bust? That means you're sewing A cup size. And some patterns that are drafted for a B cup might not fit you correctly, especially if there's a bust start there. And sometimes if it's a really fitted type of garment, you have some excess and some fitting issues, just things that you'll see on the garment that will just make it not fit correctly for you. As we know now, a lot of indie pattern brands are expanding their size ranges up to 30, 32, even more. And a lot of them actually have 2 drafts. The most common one I see is one from a 0 to a 22 or something, or a 20, and that will be drafted for a B cup. And then they have an overlap of sizes, sometimes from a 14 or a 16 up to a 30 or 32, and that second draft is made based on a D cup. So you either have a B or a D cup. What happens if the way that your body is made, you need a size 24 or a size 26, for example, but your sewing cup size is not a D cup size? You might have a smaller cup size, and smaller cup sizes go all across the board, all across sizes from sizes 0 to 32. You'll find women that just have a smaller bust cup size. In the same sense that you can find women that have a size 2 and have a large cup size, they can have an E cup size. And women that have a size 32, they can have an E, F, G cup size. So cup sizes go all across sizes. It's not specific to your measurements or your circumference. It's more got to do with your body type, genetics, lots of things. And it's a sensitive topic. You know, the reason a woman might not have any breast tissue is really personal. After measuring yourself and being really nice and confident that you know what your sewing bust cup size is, you want to always remember what your high bust measurement is. The high bust measurement is the one you want to use to choose a size of a pattern. There are a lot of patterns that have the high bust there on the chart, so that's awesome that you know what it is. If it's not there, you can easily calculate what it is. I'll put a chart here. The patterns that have a B cup size and I don't have a high bust there, just look at what the full bust is and take 2 inches away and you'll know what the high bust is for that pattern. And down below for the D cup, you just take away 4 inches from that full bust measurement. You want to know what the high bust is on the pattern and then use that high bust measurement to choose a size. Don't get confused, you know, using your high bust. If you scoot your eyes down a little bit and look at the full bust, you'll see that that full bust is larger than yours. Now, when you have an A cup size, the difference there between your high bust and your full bust is just 1 inch, right? So you might find that the pattern there has an extra inch there on the full bust, but don't worry, that is what you need for this upper chest and shoulder to fit you correctly, because then you can reduce the volume of the bust area for that to fit you correctly, as well as the shoulders. So if you don't want to do a small bust adjustment and you just go ahead, take your full bust, look at the pattern, choose your size based on your full bust, you might end up with a smaller size that is going to give you a really tight fit up here on the shoulders and the upper chest, and it's not what you like. It's really uncomfortable. And this is not about you having broad shoulders. It's about you trying to fit the bust correctly with your shoulders. Now I'm going to show you 2 clips of me wearing those purple muslins that I make. They fake garments and I make them just to show you fit. In the first clip you'll see one that fits adequately. I've chosen to make my correct size for my circumferences, high bust, full bust, waist, hips. It's got my correct sewing cup size. The dart is correctly placed. I have appropriate ease. My shoulder fits correctly, so let's see. I have a correct circumference right here, nice and comfortable for wearing. From my bust height down, I don't have vertical folds, which is what you usually see when you have excess volume in the front of a garment. And the bust dart is at the correct height. It's got the correct distance from my bust apex, and my shoulder fits me correctly. It's right at my shoulder there. I'm quite comfortable. I don't have any pulling from my shoulder to the bust. So this is what you're sort of aiming for. You know, this fabric is horrible polyester that I'm using for these fake garments, so you're never going to see them look as nice as if I used really, really nice fabric, but you get the idea. The center front is level with the back. I don't have special drag lines anywhere. My shoulders are good and correct. I have good mobility with my arm. My darts are correctly placed. I don't have vertical drag lines. I don't have stress lines here across this area. So in general, it's a good fit. Now, the scenario I'm showing you is totally fabricated and totally fake because I don't need to do a small bust adjustment. But let's say that I had a smaller cup size. I went ahead and made a pattern from a brand that does larger cup sizes. So I think I've sewn a E or a G cup size. I'm not quite sure, but I just really wanted to show you what you could see. So what I've done is I've chosen a smaller size based on my full bust with the larger cup size that I see there. Let's see how that looks. This is a top I've made using a larger cup size than mine, just so you can see some of the features you might see in your patterns. And the most important one that you'll see is from your bust point here, you have vertical drag lines of fabric. You can see it forming right there. So it's just excess here in the center. Too much fabric right here. This dart is too big for me. and there's just too much room, which also means I've got too much room in the waist and the hips right here also. I chose a smaller size with a larger cup size. This means that my shoulders don't fit properly. So you can see the sleeve, my shoulder joint is like 1/2 inch lower than this, and it's just uncomfortable. I can feel it pulling on my upper back as well. It's just too small for this area, and that's really common to happen when you have a smaller cup size. If you're not doing a small bust adjustment, this can happen. Your shoulders might be too narrow for you. So you can see how uncomfortable that is. Something else that you might notice when you stand sideways, you can see the back is there, and you can see the front tends to dip a little lower. For me, it's not so noticeable, but it could be. And it's the opposite of what happens with when you need a full bust adjustment, that your garment sits higher in the center front. When your cup size is too big, this might sit lower. In my case, this bust dart is correctly placed for my body, but it could be lower. That's also common when you have a sewing cup size larger than yours. This dart might be sitting a little lower than what you need it to be. So basically, this is just not right for me. I do not need this cup size for sewing. I need to sew my one. That's why it's important to correct, so we get a proper bust fit and shoulder fit. As I mentioned, I have narrow shoulders there. The shoulder fit is just not good, and it's because I've chosen a smaller size with the correct bust circumference, but it's just a larger cup size in general. I have extra ease at the waist and the hips that I really don't need that much. And the most important, that from the bust point, there is just fabric hanging vertically. So it's not diagonal drag lines, they are vertical, just folds actually, just all the way down. And that just shows you that you just have too much going on, too much fabric in the front. Remember, all these patterns use the same back piece and the same sleeve. So what you're looking for are things going on in the front. You might have the center front dipping down lower when you look sideways than the back. That also indicates that the sewing cup size is too large. And also where the dart is located, you might find that the dart is just too low. So it's clear indications. I hope my muslin helped. Although, you know, I do have a C cup size, you know, I did want to show you how that could look, you know. Now, for you who like a really nice maths formula, I'm going to give you one at the very end of the video. I know a lot of people hate that stuff, but I know a lot of you might absolutely love that. So that's at the very end, you can see a different approach, which will help you know exactly how much you need to take away from your actual pattern piece, from the half piece that you work with. So there's lots of scenarios where you might want to change the bust cup size of a pattern. If you're sewing commercial patterns, most of them will be drafted for a B cup. And if you're looking to do a small bust adjustment to take it down to an A cup, you would be reducing 1 inch from the total of the front, and you would be reducing 1/2 inch from your pattern, because patterns are half of the front, right? So that's one thing that you could jot down, put on the wall if that's something that you need, so that when you do this, you don't forget. For each sewing cup size difference, it's 1 inch, but 1/2 inch for the half of the pattern. You might find indie patterns that are drafted for a C cup, true bias drafts for a C cup, in the size range of 0 to 20, and then they have extended sizing that is drafted for a D. So you might find some indie patterns that are just generally drafted for a C cup. What happens if you have a B cup? You're also taking 1 inch away, you're also taking 1/2 inch from the pattern. If you want to take a C cup to an A cup, you're taking 2 cup sizes, you're taking 2 inches from the total front, you're taking away 1 inch from half of the pattern that you're working on. What happens if you bought your favorite pattern, indie brand, has a draft from sizes 14 to 32 with a D cup? What happens if you're a size 22, if you're a size 28, but you don't have a D cup? You are still going to have the same fitting issues, the narrow shoulders, excess fabric down here. So if you want to make your garments fit correctly, and you know you have a smaller cup size, why not take that D cup down to a C cup? You're removing 1 cup size, 1 inch total, 1/2 inch from your pattern. If you want to take that D cup down to a B, you're removing 2 cup sizes, 2 inches across the front, 1 inch in the pattern. Maybe you want to take your D cup all the way down to an A cup, completely remove that bust dart. You'd be removing 3 inches from the front, 1.5 inches from your pattern. So depending on the way that your pattern is drafted, it might be possible that when you're doing a small bust adjustment, from a B cup to an A cup, that side bust dart will be completely removed. And I'll show you that in detail now because I'm showing you how to do it with the paper. It's very, very easy. You'll be able to do it in no time, and you'll see clearly what the differences are and how your pattern will end up being. Let's see. I have the front pattern piece from the same pattern in the same size. The only difference here is the cup size. You can see the smaller dart volume there is a B cup, and the larger dart volume that you see there is drafted for a D cup. Now if I scoot the camera down a little bit, you'll see that the side seems shorter for the B cup size than for the D cup size. This is the same pattern. The only thing different with the pattern is the front piece, because we are using the same back piece for all the cup sizes. So the distance from under the arm to the start of the dart, and then from the end of the dart leg down to the side, that distance plus that little distance is actually the same as this and this down here. The only thing that differs is the amount inside the dart, and that's why this looks longer. But when the darts are sewn, this total side seam will be totally the same, and it will match the side seam of the back. I just wanted you to notice that. We'll be taking this front piece that's drafted for a B cup and turning it into an A cup. Now you can see that the dart volume here is pretty small to begin with. What mostly will happen is that when we turn it into an A cup, the dart will disappear. And this is common to see on tops that are designed to be loose and relaxed fit, because sometimes some of the dart volume for the bust is actually taken to the armhole, and that's what's happened here. In tops that are more fitted, or in tops that are designed to be sleeveless, maybe the dart volume for a B cup will be slightly wider than this, and when you transform it into an A, you will still have a remaining dart that is still going to be much smaller. But in this case, this is small to begin with. If you've ever seen a video about how to do full bust adjustments, the lines that we are going to draw on the pattern will be exactly the same. The first thing I'm going to do is draw a little bit of a seam allowance here on the armhole, right there. Seam allowance for this pattern is 5/8 of an inch. Here is the front notch that will match to the sleeve, and that's an important reference point. Next, we want to locate the apex of the pattern. Now some patterns might have it marked on there, others might not. This is a pretty straight dart, so I'm going to assume the bust point is a little away from there. Let's mark it about 1.5 inches away from this. Now the bust point won't really matter because you can always fix it later when you're actually going to sew your garment, but we need a bust point to be able to do our adjustment. So that point there is going to be the bust point. Now measure from here to the center front, and then draw a line that's completely parallel to the center front. From the bust point here, we are going to draw a line towards the armhole. Now if you imagine this armhole divided into 3 pieces, 1, 2 and 3, on the lower third you draw a line to there, and it's usually where the single notch is for you to match your sleeve. So around that area is always going to be a good place to do this diagonal line. Now we are going to do this only up to the seam allowance right there. Next we need to draw a line going right in between this dart, from the middle of the dart right here to the bust point. I'm doing all of these lines in green. These are lines that we are going to cut into now. The first little cut I'm going to do is from the edge of the paper to the seam allowance. So there's a little hinge right here on the armhole, so it's almost up to that seam allowance dash I did. And now I'm going to cut from here up to the bust point, and then continue diagonally up to the seam allowance line, not through to the whole paper, right there. So you want a little bit of paper connected there, so this can be a hinge point right there. Next we cut through the dart, and up to now it looks like we're doing a full bust adjustment. It's actually the same preparation, the same type of lines. And we're going to cut up to here, but leave a little piece of paper right there so we can hinge. Now instead of opening this up like you would for a full bust adjustment, where you're adding width, you're adding length, and you're making your dart wider, in this case we want to do the exact opposite. So when you want to take a pattern from a B cup to an A cup, you are going to be removing 1/2 inch from your pattern. This is half of the front, remember, the other front is over there. So you're taking away 1 inch in total from the front to remove 1 sewing cup size. So what we need to do is, from this green line that I drew there all the way down, we're going to mark a line that's 1/2 inch away from that towards the center front, and that's going to help us do the little overlap that we need to do. So let's draw that line here. Now eventually our pattern will become shorter in the center front. From the bust point, I'm going to draw a line towards the center front, making sure it's at a right angle, that there's 90 degrees right there and everything's nice and straight. But we're going to use that line later. For now, we want to bring this cut line to meet the new line, that blue line that we see there. Now when we move this over to the center, you can see that that point is going to turn out being higher than the original. This is a hinge point there that's allowing this to happen, and that hinge point there is allowing that to happen. And now we have this overlapping there by 1/2 inch, which means that there was an overlap here in the dart, which means that that actually disappeared. It's totally gone. Now if you've ever sewn a pattern that has A, B, C, D cup size options separately, you'll notice that the A cup option usually doesn't have a dart. The dart doesn't exist. So all these little pokey bits that we see here don't need to be there, because that was there because the dart had been trued. Now we don't need that anymore. This side seam is going to be the exact same length as my front that had a larger cup size. It's just the dart is gone, totally gone. Look what's happened down there. This is too long, right? Now we need to correct this center front. That's why I drew that line right there. I'm going to cut into there, and I'm going to bring this up higher to meet that center front right there. And now the pattern is corrected. You have an overlap paper in this area right here and in this area right there, meaning that you took away some width, you took away some length, you eliminated this bust dart. The side seam is going to be the exact same length as the other ones that have darts, and this will match your back piece when you want to sew the side seams. Nothing has changed in the armhole or the shoulder. You're going to use the exact same sleeve. You don't need to do any adjustments there. I'm going to draw here a circle to show you where the original bust point was in this pattern. It was right here, and now it's there. If you can tell the difference, the bust point became higher and closer to the center front. And this is what would happen if you had a dart. You would notice that difference. In this case, because there's no dart on this front, you can just sew it and be happy. There's no dart that you need to correct for anything, so it's really easy. And I'll show you next what happens when there is a dart, because now we're going to use the other front that has a D cup, and we're just going to make it smaller to a B cup, for example. Okay, here we have another front pattern piece that is actually from the same pattern we just saw, only this one is drafted for a D cup. So I've done the exact same lines you drew before. I drew my bust point right there. I drew the line vertically parallel to the center front, so the distance here is even. Then from the bust point, I drew my line up to the armhole, but just up to that seam line, and I drew a line from the middle of the dart up to the bust point, and I'll cut the same thing. If I want to take this from a D cup to a C cup, I would need to overlap by 1/2 inch. I've drawn two lines here to show you two examples. Now if I wanted to take this D cup and turn it into a C cup, I'm removing 1 cup size, which means I'm removing 1/2 inch from the pattern. So it's basically the same thing that you saw me do with the one that I was turning a B to an A, only now I'm turning this D cup size to a C cup size. And it's the same. I will bring this, overlap it. While I'm overlapping, I'm also overlapping it here, using that hinge, using that hinge, and bringing it up to this line here that is 1/2 inch away from the original one. And you can see how you have an overlap here and you've made your dart volume smaller. So this is going to be the dart volume for the C cup, and that would be how that would look. Then you would do the same. You would draw your line here and short and scoot this up to meet the center front right there. Now let's turn this into a B cup, where I'll do all the steps. When you're turning a D cup to a B cup, you are removing 2 cup sizes. You're removing 2 inches, but because this is half of the front, you're removing 1 inch. And that's why I have the second line there, having 1/2 inch there, 1/2 inch there. From there to there is 1 inch. And I'll do the same overlap, only it's a larger distance now. Just before I forget, I'm going to continue this line over here from the bust point to the center front. I'm going to do a line right there where I'm going to shorten the center front later. And now I'm going to overlap 1 inch. Let's go ahead and do the overlap 1 inch right there. Now you can see where the original bust point was, I can see it from underneath the paper. This is the original bust point, and look at it where it is now. So you can see it became higher, it became closer to the center front than the original. Also, you have this dart here that is going to be much smaller, but let's fix the center front first. Let's just cut through this line and overlap it. And now we can see that the center front is even. So that is how the front pattern piece would look now. It's narrower, it's shorter. The side seams are unchanged, and now we're going to see what to do about this dart. I can see through this white paper where that dart leg starts, and I have this one here, and now I'm just going to correct this and just draw that there. This dart will be completely out of shape here on the side. You'll need to draw it, but you can see how small the dart is now compared to what it used to be. So I'm just going to cut this away, excess paper, and you can see how smaller this dart became. This B-cup dart is very similar in size to the one that we saw with the other example that was already a B-cup. So now what we have here is a D-cup turned into a B-cup. Now this on the side needs to be trued. You probably want to get rid of some excess here at the back, some of this paper, just trim it away. You would basically just need to close your dart like you would sew it. It's very small. Press the volume to the bottom like it would when it's sewn, and then trim away on the sides. And there, this dart would make sense there on the side. Now, as we said before, this dart became higher and closer to the center front than it used to be. So this is now where you customize to you. If you've watched my video about height adjustments, I've shown you how to create a template to measure where your bust height is. Draw your seam allowance for your shoulder. So don't count that seam allowance. In my case, my bust point would be an inch lower than this if I needed to reduce my cup size. And this is now where I would just cut a little rectangle on the dart and scoot it down, and I've shown you how to do that before. It means that we've reduced the pattern on the waist and the hips also, not just around the bust. Now we know we needed to reduce it at the bust, and that's accomplished. But now your pattern piece is smaller, and it might be what you need, but you might want to add that inch back into the side. So I'm just going to put a little piece of paper behind there, and then if you needed to add an inch, just add an inch here on the side seam. And then from below where you did your bust, maybe an inch below, you want to start adding that back on all the way down. And that's how you've added some width back again to this bottom. If you did need the original width at the hips and you needed the width at the waist, that's how you can correct that. But just check if you need to do that. You might not need to, but you might. It's just as easy as adding it back on below where you've done all this adjustment. You see that certain aspects of your front pattern won't change at all. Your armhole length won't change. That's why we snipped right up to the seam allowance. We don't want the length of that seam to change. The total side length doesn't change either. It'll match your back perfectly. There's no change there. But there were things that were changed. Mainly, you have a center front that is narrower. You have a center front that is shorter. You have a bust point that turned up a little higher. You have a dart that turned up closer to the center front, and the dart volume is reduced or completely gone. So those are the things that you'll find when you do a small bust adjustment. I've shown you already how you can figure out where your bust height is, and I'll leave a video here about that so you can check on it. I don't want to make these videos extra long, so there's content I've already shown you. You can watch that and get a lot more information in general. And you're going to have a top that is going to fit you correctly on the shoulders. You won't have narrow, tight shoulders. You won't have excess at the bust. You have a top that fits correctly here, correctly there. And then if what you took away from the waist and hips is something that you need to add back on, then you can just easily add that back onto the side seam, and you won't have an issue with getting tight hips or something like that. You might not need to do that. Just check your personal circumstances and you'll have a much better fitting garment than if you didn't do the small bust adjustment. As I mentioned, you know, if you ignore this type of thing and you just make your garments, you end up with problems that might make you think you have other fitting issues. You might think, I've got really broad shoulders, you know, I've got to fix the shoulders, and it's not your shoulders that are the issue. It's just the smaller bust cup size that doesn't match the pattern that is made for a larger cup size. Now, in the same way that I did with the full bust adjustment video, I'm giving you a little formula at the end, because you can just memorize that for each sewing cup size it's an inch difference, and so when you're working on your pattern it's half of it, so it's half an inch per cup size difference. Whether you're adding for a full bust adjustment or you're taking away and overlapping for a small bust adjustment, and that could be something you could just fix in your mind and do really easily. But some of you like maths, and I love maths. I like having a little formula there, and it can be really easy for you to use this and know exactly how much you need to reduce from your pattern piece, from your actual pattern piece. Take your high bust, jot it down there, add on the cup size that the pattern is drafted for. So if you're working with a B cup size, add 2 inches. If you're working with a D cup size, add 4. And then take away your full bust divided by 2. Let's do a really quick example using a pattern made for a B sewing cup size. Let's say your high bust is 38 and your full bust is 39. You have a 1 inch difference. You have an A sewing cup size. So jotting the numbers down on this formula, you would write your high bust 38. You would add on the 2 inches that the B sewing cup size pattern uses, and then you would take away 39, which is your full bust, divided by 2, and you'll get half an inch. You know exactly that half an inch is what you need to reduce from that pattern that you're working with. You've chosen a size based on your 38-inch high bust there. Let's do another example, and let's take a pattern that is drafted for a D cup size. Let's say my measurements, my high bust is 40, my full bust is 43. I have a 3-inch difference that makes me a C cup. My pattern is a D cup. So let's jot these things down on the formula. So my high bust is 40. I'm going to add on the 4 inches that the D cup pattern uses. And then I'm going to take away my full bust, which is 43, divided by 2. And I get half, which means I need to reduce my pattern by half an inch to take it from a D to a C cup. So you can see that this formula is also super helpful if you like to have something really exact. I hope it was helpful. Now, one thing you can do if you totally want to avoid full bust adjustments, small bust adjustments, is look for patterns that offer individual cup sizes, like Itch to Stitch, for example, is one of the few patterns that actually offers an A cup for woven patterns. I don't have knowledge of other brands. Maybe you do. If you do, let me know so I can talk about them in the future. But as a brand that I'm very familiar with that I test, Itch to Stitch Patterns has an A, a B, a C, a D, a double D cup size. So all across the size range from 0 to 40, you can find your bust cup there, and you don't need to worry about these types of adjustments. I do want to do a roundup sort of Q&A video about bust adjustments, including the full bust and the small bust, because I think that knowing about them both helps you understand them. Although you might just need one of these adjustments or none. I think all of this is helpful when you want to fit yourself. You might have thought, you have shoulder issues when you actually just have bust fitting issues. So that's why I haven't touched on shoulders yet. I think shoulder fitting comes way at the end. After you've got your bust fitting correctly, there might be actually people that have genuinely broader shoulders and narrower shoulders. But we need to sort out that bust first, I think. I hope this was helpful, and I will see you again with a sewing technique video I've been really excited to share. Thank you so much. Happy sewing.